J.J. Dewey here again. We've been talking about the principle of working with the majority. The name of the program is called The Majority Speaks. And it's called that because it's really important that the majority of the people get to hear their will being expressed. Because oftentimes we have found, since the foundation of our government, and especially in the past few years, that the majority of the people feel that they've been neglected by their representatives, especially as their representatives are bought off by all kinds of different special interests, where it appears that the special interests capture the attention of our elected representatives more than the people that elected them. Now, one important thing to realize is that our government is not perfect and our Constitution is not perfect. And there's two different views abounding about our Constitution. One view, on one extreme, is that it's a divinely inspired document and it's almost like the Bible, it's God-breathed, and it has to be followed 100% and nobody better ever touch it. The other extreme is there are groups that call it a living document, and it really doesn't mean anything because whatever we decide it means is what it means. And that means the Constitution really has no power at all if we can do that. So both of these extremes are somewhat incorrect. We need law as a precedent. We need law and a Constitution as a power to give us power to have a stable society. But it needn't be so rigid that it can't be changed. And on the other hand, it can't be so flexible that we just like throw it out the window. And this is what's happened with a lot of laws that have been passed is, like for instance, the immigration laws. We call illegal aliens illegal, and yet half of the population, or a good percentage of the population, want to act like they're not illegal at all, and the other half want them to be classified as illegal and treated as illegal. So we have a problem with our laws where we look at them either too rigidly or not rigidly enough. We have to have a middle way here, and our founders realized this. They realized that the Constitution wasn't perfect. They thought they had a pretty good document, and they thought that future generations may even make improvements in it. And because of this, they may created avenues whereby change could be made in the Constitution. So if there's a problem with the Constitution, we shouldn't just like throw it out the window or treat it as rigid as glass, but we need to if there's something we don't like about the Constitution or any particular law, we should then seek to change those things. And so our Constitution is not perfect. No law is perfect. Matter of fact, there's no such thing as a perfect law that applies all the time, even like stealing, for instance. Who for instance, that had a kid that was starving to death might not steal a loaf of bread to keep his own flesh and blood from starving. So even something like stealing might be the right thing to do at the right time. So no law is perfect, yet we have to have these laws to create stability. We have to have laws that prevent theft and prevent murder, prevent rape, all these different things. Now, the majority goes along with any set of laws pretty much that make sense. The majority doesn't want extreme rigidity, and they don't want us to be so flexible that nothing means anything. The majority, right down the middle of people, they want common sense laws, and they want their voices to be heard. And for this purpose, that I wrote the 95 Theses of Modern Times, patterned after the 95 Theses from Martin Luther in the 1500s. but this is the political 95 Theses, and we've been covering this, and we're up to number 63, and we're in a section of the 95 Theses called Environment. Number 63 reads thus: we support and encourage the United States to be energy efficient, so we do not have to depend on foreign energy sources. Now, the vast majority agree with that statement. Where the disagreement comes in is how it's to be accomplished. But basically, the vast majority, both on the left and right, want us to be self-sufficient. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail as we proceed. The majority of up to 74% of citizens support offshore drilling, or at least they did before the disaster happened. And Rasmussen poll had it as 67%, Zogby as 74%. And what's interesting is even after the drilling disaster, the BP disaster, there's still a majority of people support offshore drilling. Now what's interesting about this is it seems like in this day and age that every time there's some problem, there's a cry to just eliminate everything to do with the problem instead of solving the problem. Let's take, for instance, the moon landing. John Kennedy, when he was president, set the goal to land on the moon before the end of the decade in the 60s and bring him safely back. And everything seemed to be progressing along the way until we had a major disaster where there was a fire in one of the capsules they were doing training in, and 3 astronauts were killed. And a lot of people thought, wow, this is the end of the moon program. You know, we're not going to continue with this. But fortunately, we had our leadership continued on. And part of the reason we did that was because we loved Kennedy so much that we wanted to make sure that his words were fulfilled. And if Kennedy wasn't such a beloved figure, we probably wouldn't have proceeded. Now, what would happen if something like that happened today? If we were headed toward the moon or Mars and all of a sudden we had a major catastrophe, astronauts killed, do you think we might say, well, let's not go to Mars, or let's not go back to the moon, or whatever? But we're a lot more negative today. When there's something bad that happens, all of a sudden we just want to scrap the whole thing rather than to solve the problem. But what we did when the 3 astronauts were killed, we looked at the problem and we said, well, we have a problem, let's solve it. But they didn't say, let's just negate everything. Let's just not do it. Let's just trash the whole program. They did not say that. They said, let's solve the problem. Not too long ago, when they, in the 1800s, when they began building railroads, one of the problems with the railroads, they had to build bridges across great chasms. And in building these bridges, the first few bridges they built, the trains were going across the bridges and they collapsed and killed tremendous numbers of people. And for some period of time, it looked like it would be impossible to build bridges that were safe. So there was a lot of outcry. A lot of people were saying, well, let's just bag the railroad system entirely because it's impossible to build a safe bridge. Well, fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and instead of saying, let's never build another bridge, they thought, well, let's build a better bridge. And so eventually, the bridges got safe enough where people felt comfortable traveling on the trains and crossing the bridges. So they eventually became safe. Now, the same thing with air travel. The first guys to go in the skies, the Wright brothers and several others that followed them, it was extremely dangerous to fly those early airplanes. And a lot of people thought, man, we're never going to be able to have any type of commercial flight. It'll just be daredevils that will be flying these planes. But instead of just bagging the ideas of the airplane as a novelty, people looked at it and thought, well, what can we do to improve it? Now, the same thing with drilling for oil. Instead of just looking at this situation with BP, we need to, and say, well, we need to never drill for oil offshore again as long as we exist. And that may solve the one problem, but it creates another one. All of a sudden, we have tremendous shortages that will affect our economy. Our economy is already affected bad enough. But what we need to do instead of just bagging it is just say, well, what can we do to make everything safer? What can we do to correct the problem? BP, for instance, had all kinds of infringements and fines, violations that the other companies didn't have. Somehow they got away with it, and Exxon and the other oil companies had a lot better track record, and they didn't have any problem like BP had. So we need to look at that, and instead of just running from the problem, we need to solve the problem. And this applies to a lot of things we're doing today, is we need to get back the can-do spirit that the early Americans had. Until recently, we were known for that can-do spirit. That we can do anything. We can and probably the epitome of that was when John Kennedy got up and announced that we're going to the moon. Man, that was, even for me who was in love with the space program as a young kid, I thought, that was a bold move, even from my point of view. So I thought that was terrific. But that was the epitome of the can-do spirit, and it seemed like from the moon landing on, that can-do spirit seemed to disintegrate among us. We don't have it like we used to, and we need to be able to get that back. And I just love that feeling that we had when we were going to the moon, that no matter what happened, we were going to solve the problem. I mean, it didn't matter what came up. The idea that we had was the problem was going to be solved. I mean, there was no question. It wasn't, can the problem be solved? The question was, well, how long is it going to take to solve this problem? That was the only question, was how long it was going to take. We knew that we were going to solve every problem that came up. There was never any doubt. And this is what we have to do with like oil independence, is we have to have the idea that we can solve the problem, we can become independent, we can get the oil that we need as long as we need it, and then wean ourselves off of it and go on to other types of energy that are more friendly to the earth and the people as a whole. If the polls are unclear on the development of a controversial energy source, this is number 65, such as ANWR, for example, then we should hold a national referendum. Then after at least 30 days of discussion, we should vote and the majority opinion be honored.